Well, welcome back, everybody.
Welcome back, everybody.
Sorry, we were like on a major delay, so we were like just listening to Arlene sing, and then Dan was like,
I was like, oh, and we're live.
Back. So
Yes.
there's like kind of a delay for some of us. So,
Yeah.
But welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your time of worship. It's always so refreshing to listen to Arlene sing. Yeah. I mean, I just wish she was a little bit more talented.
Right? Yeah.
I mean,
no, I get that. Yeah. Seriously, Arlene.
No, Arlene, you're fabulous. We love you. So first, before we start our kind of conversation about what we're talking about today, I just want to check in with everybody. I know that last week was really heavy and it was a lot, and I know that it has weighed really heavily upon so many of you, and just know that you have been in our hearts and on our minds, and just want to see how you're doing, how you're processing. We are all in this thing together, and I've just been thinking about all of you so much, and just hoping and praying that you're able to process whatever it is you're feeling about all of these things. And so go ahead and let us know in the chat, how you're doing, if there's any specific ways that we can pray for you. We would love to know that.
And just for a little bit of an update, I will, my last service with all of you will be our live service that we do on the 27th. So I'll be here this week and next week, and then obviously on the 27th. And then I'll kind of go behind the scenes for a while, because there's a lot to hand off. There's a lot of kind of behind the scenes inner working. So I'll be working on that before I kind of fully transition back. And then we'll move forward and see what's next.
Yeah. Also, so seriously, to all of you who after last week, whether it was, I mean, literally it took me probably 4 or 5 days to get through all of the comments, the messages, the emails. I mean, it was just like this huge outpouring of love and support and encouragement, and we're just so grateful. Thank you to everyone who brought gifts by the house, who, sent emails, who called, who texted, who commented, who just poured out love, support, and encouragement. I mean, we felt so seen and so held and so loved, and we're just so grateful to all of you. There have been people too who have just given some significant financial gifts to the church, which is just super humbling. And so just thank you for your generosity, and for like I said, we're all in this together. And so I just feel like sometimes there's just something really beautiful when someone's hurting, or when something is going on that is hard. We have this ability to just rally together, and I feel like that's what you've all done. And so we just love you and are really grateful. And just a couple of kind of business things before we get into our discussion today. So we had a couple work nights last week. Thank you to everyone who came out. It happened faster than I expected.
100%. Yeah. And 2 nights and over a couple hours each night, we virtually got everything out of all the offices, everything out of all theirs. Everything out of the storage room, which I didn't...
Have you had ever been in there before?
I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know that was a thing, but apparently...
It's like a black hole. Things just
I was like, oh my gosh, this room has walls. Like,
I think we found an intern that we forgot we had in the supply room. So it's like...
We're sorry to his parents. But yeah, no, we got everything down there. This past weekend, what we did is we opened it up for some local kind of mobile churches. We first wanted to give them kind of first look at everything. So was able to sell a lot of equipment to them, a lot of stuff to some churches that had need. So that was great getting to be able to do that. And then it will be next week that we do the community-wide one, estate sale. Yeah.
So this week we went ahead and put on the calendar 2 more work nights. We're going to do it same days and same time as last week. So Tuesday, Thursday, 6:30 to 8:30, because the auditorium, all of the stuff in the auditorium right now is kind of all over the place. And so we just want to have some people come so we can get it a little bit better organized, especially after yesterday when all the churches came. Now we have the space to be able to make it a little bit easier for people when they come on Saturday to be able to see what's available and to make their purchases. So, so spread the word. If you're able to come and help, we would be so appreciative of your help.
And again, like last time, if you have underlying medical conditions or high risk, please don't come.
Yes. If you don't
Yes.
feel comfortable, like, don't feel guilty
Yeah.
for not coming.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. We are still in a pandemic, so
Yeah.
we know that. So
Yeah.
no, you don't need to apologize for not being there. You don't need to feel
Yeah.
bad about it. Like,
Yep. Just bring a mask. Masks are required while we're there. And if you're able to come, great. And if not, we got plenty of hands.
yep.
So we're
Yep,
good.
for sure. So for today, I just, as I was thinking about just after last week and moving forward, I think whenever we walk through a time that's really difficult and really painful, I don't think I've ever walked through a painful time in my life where I haven't, as I was walking through it, have learning some really valuable life lessons. Not that, now I want to be clear, I do not believe that God causes or allows bad things to happen to us so that we can learn and grow. That isn't loving to me. But I do believe that in the midst of our pain and our suffering, God is very present and very near. And because of that nearness, we just happen to learn and grow. And I feel like that's what has been happening during this time. It's been the same way now that it has been with every other difficult time in my life. And we're going to kind of have a little bit of a discussion and just, I want to share with you some of the things that I'm learning right now that are kind of fresh on my heart that I think not only apply to my specific situation, but I think also can apply to all of us when we're walking through hard or uncertain times. And I think right now we're kind of collectively all walking through hard and uncertain times, not just us at Icon with the future of our church, but also in our world. I mean, our world is on fire, literally and figuratively. I mean, there have just
We
been...
saw David is on here. He's from Seattle, out where a lot of the fires are and that sort of thing. So,
Gosh.
There's just people literally all around the nation from all... from the fires to a global pandemic to police violence against Black people and people of color, and I mean just over and over, it's evident.
It's just a lot.
Yeah.
So I think these are some things I think that we, in particular, too, as people who claim to follow Jesus, as Christians and as the church, I think these are things that are really important for us to learn and internalize, and then to also enable us to be able to love each other well. He's going to go take care of our dog because she's, really annoying and barking at the moment. And there might be children that come in the door. I know we say this usually, but if it happens, it happens, and it just is what it is. So, so there's three things in particular that I want to talk about today that have been really close to my heart lately. And the first one is this, that I have been learning more than ever that community and connection with one another really is everything. I know we say that a lot in the church. We say that a lot about, community is important and that we belong to each other and we need each other and that we need connection and we're wired for connection, and we say all of those things. But I know for me, it's in times of pain and suffering that becomes so clear of how desperately we need each other, and also how we truly do belong to each other. And I was thinking about, we know that in Christ, as a body of followers of Jesus, as a body of Christians, that we are all one body. We see scripture talk about that we are all the body of Christ. And, we see in Romans 12, it talks about how we are all one body and each part of the body belongs to all the other parts. And sometimes we look at that in the framing of everybody has their role to play, where it's like, what's your spiritual gift and what can you contribute to the kingdom? And I do believe in that, but I also think there's something deeper here in the context of belonging to each other and in community, where when we look at human beings, and particularly with human beings within the church, we have both an incredible capacity to cause harm, or we have an incredible capacity to bring healing.
Yeah.
And wow, has that ever been apparent to me when I think about some of the greatest hurts I've ever experienced in my life have always been from other humans. It's, and honestly, most of those times, other humans who are within the church and who call themselves Christians. But also one of the biggest way that I've experienced love is from other humans and from other Christians. So, we have the capacity to do either. And I think this is why, especially within the church, when harm is caused to us by someone else who is also a follower of Jesus, I think that harm, it like cuts extra deep because of that idea that we are all one body in Christ and because we belong to each other. So when one part of that body is causing hurt or harm to another part of that body, it feels like it just hurts in a unique kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think because there's an expectation of, anytime our expectations aren't met, I think in that gap there's some amount of pain, you know? And I think when you have an expectation of, I can remember this. There were, in this season, some conversations or some individuals or some things that I thought, well, at least here with this person, it'll be safe. Or, you know what I mean? And walking in with that expectation for the church or for loved ones or for friends, and that pain to come, it's painful to hear things and to experience things anyway. But then when there's that expectation of like, this is going to be a trusted place, it's even more so painful. I think for Christians, some of the greatest pains, I can speak for this, have been inside the church. And it's not because those people, Christians are any more hurtful than non-Christians. You know what I mean? Like, people are just people. But I think it's that expectation of these people are safe. These people are like Christ. These people are... And when that betrayal happens, you're right. It does hurt even more. Yeah, for sure. And, and we all, if you're human, you have caused hurt or harm to another human being at some point in your life. We have all done that. And so I think through all of this, so again, yes, I think some of the greatest hurts have happened, through other Christians, but also I have found that the way that other parts of the body have rallied together and have surrounded me in love and have made me feel seen, which that, like, being seen, I can't even describe what that does for me, and I'm sure it does for all of us, but I just, that is something for me that when I get that text message or someone says that thing to me and it's like, I just feel so seen. There is something really, really powerful about that. And so, I guess, coming out of this, I think one thing that I am really meditating on and sort of praying over myself and over all of us as a church body is that may we choose, knowing the capacity that we have, not only as human beings, because as humans, we do have the capacity, whether we're Jesus followers or not, we are human, and so we can cause hurt and harm to others, but even more so because we follow Jesus and because we know the way of Jesus is the way of love. So even more so, that should be something that we are striving for. I just keep thinking over and over, I'm like, may I and may we always, 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 always land on the side of bringing healing and not harm, and bringing love and not pain, to the very best of our ability. Obviously, we are human, so we're not perfect, but that is something that I, has been really huge for me. And I think too, and we've had several conversations about this, but Christians and individuals from within the church have been the source of some of the greatest pain. It's also been the source of some of our greatest hopes. We've talked so much about, I think honestly, without seeing the way Black and Indigenous and all people of color in the queer community, those Christians and the way they've still pursued the church and Christ in after the church has done so much harm. Like, to me, that shows me a way forward. If they can pursue Christ and love one another and be merciful and be empathetic towards an institution and individuals that have created so much harm in their life, it's like, gosh, I've got a long way to go, and what a great example I have before me.
Yep.
I think LGBTQ Christians and Black and Indigenous people of color that are following Christ gives me hope for what the church could and should be.
Yeah. And it's really humbling. And, I received a message from someone last week, and they, it was real encouraging. And they just said, they were like, forget the haters, and they said, look to the margins, because it's people in the margins that's their life.
Yeah.
Like, is having to move past those hurts and those pains and that suffering. And I believe with all my heart that is, I'm looking to them and following their lead, and looking to them for inspiration, not in a tokenizing kind of a way, but a genuine, like, they are my Black friends, my LGBTQ friends, other people of color that are friends in my life have been the major source of inspiration for me through any time when life is hard or through suffering or whatever. They are my greatest teachers. Yeah. And so to all of you, thank you. Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of work to do, but also you are so much like Jesus, and it encourages me daily. Yeah. So sure. For sure. And then a second thing, this kind of, leads into this a little bit, but I have really, really learned the power of empathy, and true empathy, like where you genuinely move in to the pain and move into the suffering, and not just, I feel sorry for you, or that must be really hard for you, and then you kind of move on. But like people that have moved up closer in the pain and the suffering and have sort of planted themselves, and they don't move, and then they're with you through all of it. I think this goes for people, for us, and then for people in our lives who are grieving and hurting. I think having empathy and saying, I'm going to choose to sit with you in this, and put myself in the middle of your suffering and allow myself to suffer with you, to bear the burden with you, is really powerful. So it goes for people who are grieving and hurting. It goes for people in the margins and people who are being oppressed. Those of us that have more privilege, looking at them and saying, this may not be my experience. My experience is really different from yours, but just because something hasn't been your experience doesn't mean it isn't true. And the other day I posted on Facebook something, because I was just thinking about it so much, but I think one of the best ways we can love our neighbor well is to, number one, listen to their lived experience, and then believe them when they say, this has been my experience, and then act accordingly on that. I think it's really easy sometimes, especially when it comes to like marginalized groups, those of us that have more privilege, we can tend to look at them and say, well, that hasn't been my experience, so that can't possibly be true for you. And so we can be real dismissive sometimes of other people's pain and suffering. And I just think, even if we look at Matthew 7:12, where Jesus is talking about, the golden rule that we all, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But I think Jesus here, is he's stressing the importance of treating other people the way that you want to be treated. And that really, to me, is empathy at its finest. When we are willing to empathize and listen and believe people and enter into their pain, and then how can we help? How can we help bring justice? How can we help bring healing in this situation? So, yeah, I mean,
I think, sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
No, I was, I think this is so true. When I saw your notes, the first thing that came to, I kind of glanced down, I saw the empathy is power, and what went through my head first, and I think this is just because it's been so hard for me, but I do think it gives us strength. I do think it gives us power, is being empathetic, yes, with those that are hurting, but trying to just live empathetically. And where that's been hard for me, just honestly, is people that have hurt me. You know what I mean? Trying to so when I saw your notes, I was like, why don't you skip that section, because I don't want to talk about that. But honestly, I have tried so hard over this past season to tell myself a better story. You know what I mean? About those people that have done different things, and just trying so hard to believe, okay, their lived experience has shaped them in the same way my lived experience has shaped me, and I want to believe the best for that person. I think it was it Oshita Moore at Evolving Faith that talked about this?
Yes, you guys,
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, Oshita Moore, when it comes to her she has that whole concept of telling yourself a better story about, and she, in her talk, if you listen to the Evolving Faith podcast,
which is a great podcast, by the way.
Fantastic podcast. Listen to Oshita Moore's, and she tells a story that her son experience her son had with a racist individual, and it's just
and I was listening to that this week, and it was just, I know it to be true.
Yeah,
I am doing my best to walk it out, but man, it is hard. You know what I mean? It is so difficult to try to have empathy, not just, yes, absolutely, for the hurting, for the marginalized, for the, but also for the ones on the other side. Now that, again, that doesn't mean you expose yourself to that pain. That means you don't, there may be someone that you're not in relationship with them because there's been betrayed trust, but to offer forgiveness and not hold on to that, and to choose to have some empathy and try to tell yourself a better story about where they're at. So that
is really huge. And in a second, I'm actually going to talk about forgiveness, so that leads into it really well. But Perfect. It's that just goes back to the loving your enemies thing. I mean, when we think enemy, a lot of times we think, when I think enemy, I think Thanos and the Avengers, you know what I mean? Where it's we have that kind of a picture, but I think that, in our context, I think oftentimes enemy is the one who's caused us pain, or the one who has hurt us. And, but I mean, man, it's hard, and it requires this level of emotional energy. It's no wonder we've both been exhausted, because when you really try to do that, it's really, really, really difficult. Yeah. And I just want to say one last thing about the empathy before we move on to forgiveness. But, I think, back to the whole idea of treating others the way that we want to be treated, I think, and again, this goes along with what you were saying about people that have hurt us, but it's either, kind of looking at ourselves and going, man, if I was grieving and if I was in pain, wouldn't I want people to sit with me? Or if I was the one causing the hurt, if I was the one causing the pain, wouldn't I be so humbled with people trying to tell themselves a better story about me? And that's such a hard pill to swallow, because oftentimes that can seem like we're saying, just let people off the hook for the things they do that are hurtful, and painful. And that's not at all what that's about. But I really do think that empathy has this power to be able to shift the narrative in our lives. And I think one thing to remember too is we need to not put caveats with our empathy and with our ability to walk through pain with others. I have seen so many times, particularly with Christians, and we are in church this morning, so this is sort of me pastoring you, saying as Christians we have to do better in this. The scriptures tell us to mourn with those who mourn. It doesn't say only mourn with those who you agree with. It doesn't say before you sit in someone's pain, make sure the world knows all of the ways in which you don't agree with what they think and believe. I have seen that. I have seen people go through unimaginable sorrow and suffering and pain, only to have Christians use that as their opportunity to pile on and to be like, well, I'm really sorry they're going through this, but dot. Yeah. I'm really sorry that you're experiencing the suffering, but if you wouldn't have done this, then you wouldn't be experiencing this.
Or even, don't get me wrong, I don't agree with this person's X, Y, and Z. I don't, all these caveats, and then go, but I'm so sorry they're walking through this. It's is it that hard to just go, man, that sucks.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm
that's
so sorry
yes.
you're walking
Yeah.
through that
Yeah.
pain, and yeah, like, so when we empathize and when we mourn with one another, there doesn't need to be caveats. Do we really think that, like, me offering condolences or sitting in someone's pain, do we really think that everyone's going to look at us and go, oh, well, that means they must agree, like,
Yeah.
they must agree on everything. It just doesn't matter. Like, the human, like, the kind, loving human thing to do is to just mourn with those who mourn.
Yeah.
Period. That's, yeah.
Yep. That's good.
Yeah. So then the final thing, forgiveness. Okay, so forgiveness is really damn hard, okay? And I think this is probably one of the biggest things that I've been personally trying to learn how to do. And I say trying because I am still a work in progress and I don't like forgiveness. and I wish I didn't have to do it because it's really hard.
Yeah.
And I think for most of my life, I only understood forgiveness in one way. I didn't really have a full picture of what forgiveness actually meant. I think it was this picture of, you need to forgive those who have hurt you because that's what a good Christian does. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard this too, the whole, like, because if you don't forgive others, then God's not going to forgive you. And it was almost like this, forgiveness took on this idea of, someone hurts me, but I'm a Christian, so I don't even, like, I need to kind of pretend like I'm not hurt and that didn't even happen, and have grace and forgive them, and everybody's fine, and we move on and we don't talk about it, and it's in the past. And that's kind of what my understanding of forgiveness has been. And I think because of that, I think what I learned how to do was to bury all of my hurt instead of feeling it, because feeling it and feeling the emotions that come along with it made me feel like I wasn't walking in forgiveness. And so I just buried for my whole life. And I remember when we started going to counseling, we're using BetterHelp.com, which is ideal during a pandemic because it's all online, and it has been incredible.
Yeah.
It's affordable. It's just really, really great.
Yeah.
And in my first couple of sessions, my counselor kept coming back to this idea of forgiveness as I was telling
Listen,
her.
We need to talk about other things.
I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. And I knew that
internet connection's getting bad. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And I knew it was something, because as soon as she said it, I had this visceral internal bodily reaction to where I didn't want to talk about it. And so we kind of talked through some things, and as we were talking, I realized, I finally said to her, I go, you know what? I'm like, because she wanted me to write a list of times where I've had to forgive people, like whether it was past or present or whatever. And I had a really difficult time doing that. And I told her, I said, I think it's because I don't know if I've ever actually forgiven, because I've never even actually allowed myself to acknowledge the hurt in the first place. And this was like the first time in my life when I was feeling so much hurt. And so I couldn't not acknowledge it because it was so in front of my face, and just had to realize, I can't fix what I don't allow myself to feel. And
That's really good.
So I'm learning right now about forgiveness. I'm learning that forgiveness, it's not about not being angry. It's not about not feeling the hurt. It's not about just having grace and letting people get away with hurting you and just taking it, kind of taking it on the chin and moving on and not addressing it. That I'm learning that actually forgiveness is a boundary that you set to bring freedom to your soul. And I've heard people talk before about how, they'll say things like, well, forgiveness is actually more for you than it is for the person that caused the hurt. And that always, I didn't fully grasp that. But I'm starting to. And I'm starting to realize, I can set this boundary and say, first of all, allow myself to be angry and to feel the hurt. And I may have to take a step back from relationships, and that's okay, but then a friend of mine the other day tweeted this thing, and it was literally, I read it and I was like, Chad, this is exactly what we're almost word for word what I'm learning. But this is what he said. He said, there are so many holy reasons to forgive those who have hurt and wronged you, but perhaps the most understated reason is this: forgiveness is a boundary. The offender takes up way too much heart space until you forgive them. Hear me, you deserve the freedom that forgiveness offers. I don't say this lightly because I fully realize the courage that genuine forgiveness requires of you. I've done the forgiveness thing right, and I've done it wrong, and the courage it takes to forgive far outweighs the strain that unforgiveness puts on your heart. And that was my friend Chad Brugman that said that. And
It's really good.
I was like, forgiveness is a boundary. It is. It's a boundary. It's like us saying, I am no longer going to allow this person to take up space, or like the actions of this person to take up space in my heart and in my mind, because the energy required to carry that is so heavy and so exhausting. And so I think forgiveness is a practice. I think it's a boundary that we set for freedom for our own souls. And it's really, really hard. And it takes a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And I'm not there yet with all of it. I'm still working in that. And I think that's okay. I don't think if you are dealing with unforgiveness in any way, if you know that there's people that have hurt you and you just seem like you just have not been able to set that boundary of forgiveness yet, like, that's okay, because it's a practice, and it doesn't just happen immediately. Sometimes the wounding is so deep that it's going to take time. But I think when we can reframe it that way and look at forgiveness as a boundary and as something that sets us free, and that doesn't mean, like you said earlier, it was like, doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be in relationship with that person. There might need to be a season where you're not in relationship. There might not ever be a close friendship moving forward. There might have been too much trust that was broken, and that's okay. I think it's possible to have forgiveness without necessarily still being in that relationship. There was someone the other day, and it's someone that I know that he has been going through AA and has been sober for I think a year and a half now, maybe almost 2 years. And when he was going through kind of the 12 steps, and part of it was making amends with people that you have wronged or with people that have wronged you. And so he said there was a certain individual that had been the cause and source of immense pain in his life. And he, looked at that situation and was like, okay, in order to get my own inner healing, I also, anything that I may have said or done, that also caused harm or that was also hurtful, I want to own up to that, even not taking responsibility for that person's actions. But so they reached out, sent him a message and was like, hey, I'm doing these 12 steps and I'm, all this thing. And then he said this person responded and was trying to almost engage in a relationship. And so he sent a message back and said, I want to be clear, this was not an invitation into a relationship. That isn't something that is going to be healthy for me. And that's not what I'm trying to pursue here. I'm just trying to say that I am releasing you from the space that you have taken up in my mind. And any harm that I have caused, I am making amends for that. And I just thought that was such a good example of what that looks like.
Let me ask you, for people, I like myself, when this is one question I ask my counselor, I tend to be get very practical. You know what I mean? When people talk about before you can move towards forgiveness, before you can move towards fixing that, you have to feel it. You have to allow yourself. And I think for me, I remember hearing that at various times, or even as I was talking to my counselor, and I'm like, what does that even look like? So what does that look like for you? And my counselor, she kind of gave me some tools to, okay, here's some practical things to do that will help that. But when you talk about processing those feelings, processing those emotions, allowing yourself to feel it, what does that look like for you? How do you do that on a practical level? Do you just sit there and think it through? You know what I mean? What does that look like for you?
A lot of that, yes.
Okay.
I think for me, what I've done in the past is I've shut out any, say someone hurts me and I have a thought about them that just, it's when I think about them, it's I just get super angry. And I, kind of start asking, like, why did they do this? Why do they think this way about me? You know, before, what I would do is I would just shut that part of my brain down, and I wouldn't even, and I would feel really guilty for even being angry. But so what I've started to do is, instead of shut those thoughts down, I just go with it. And I just let myself feel and think all of the things. Even if like in my brain it starts to go to like, even if my brain is like, oh, they're a terrible person, you know, which normally, like, I would have never even allowed myself to think that, because it was like, as a Christian, you can't think that kind of thing about somebody else. Now, is that true? Are these people terrible humans? No. But rather than shut down, I just let any thought that I have about them and about the situation come into my brain. Sometimes I verbalize them to someone that I can trust, but I certainly don't want to I don't want to like cause someone else to have to, I don't want to paint people in a bad light to other people, you know? But I think just letting myself think all of those things and not feel guilty about it. And it's hard, because I was so used to doing the other for so long. But I think even just letting my brain go there, and then with each thought, getting very curious and go, okay, why do I feel this way? What made me feel this way? And then I think even just that act of that release of allowing myself to feel those things, it like, it's been really healing for me. And everyone's process will look different, but for me, the biggest thing has been sitting in my feelings, you know, for real, like sitting in those emotions and those feelings and not being afraid of them, and then letting them teach me, rather than, you know, like if I feel angry or I feel jealous or I feel really, really, you know, annoyed, instead of just dismissing it, I sit in it and ask myself, why? What is that trying to teach me? You know,
I think for me, I'm probably not as in touch with my emotions as you know, so I think for me, that's kind of even hard to do. Like, oh, sit in your emotions and feel them. I'm like,
how do you do that?
Okay, you know. So one thing that kind of my counselor, one tool that she gave was to write it out, and not in a sense of like journaling, but even just what happened. You know what I mean? Writing what happened, what they said, what you thought, and that for me has been a way to kind of, because those emotions come rushing back. You know what I mean? When you're writing it down, when you're retelling it, and that's where I've been able to kind of feel some of that. So that's been one thing. And then something even last night, I was just, you know, having the feelings, and I was listening to a podcast, which again, another recommendation for podcast, The Cozy Robot Show. It was formerly Ask Science Mike. Such a great podcast, and I'm loving kind of what he's doing now with it. It honestly feels like Mr. Rogers for adults with lots of really smart people.
He is. That is
100%.
That is the best description.
He's Mr. Rogers for adults, but like really, really smart.
Yes,
and
he is.
He talked about this thing. He calls it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think his therapist, his counselor, told him this too. But when he's feeling that, to kind of ground himself in the moment, he finds 5 things he can see. He looks around and identifies those, and then 4 things that he can hear, 3 things that he can touch, and then 2 things that he can smell, and 1 thing that he can taste. And he says it gets harder the more you go, and that really helps you focus in on being fully present in your body. And it's like having this lingering taste of the coffee I'm drinking, or, you know, and that kind of centers him in that moment and in his body. And that's kind of a helpful way, if it gets a little overwhelming in that process, to kind of do that. And that was helpful for me.
That I'm going to start doing that. Because that's like, that's really, really good.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time. Anything you want to close with, or do we need to make any announcements or anything?
I don't think so. Just be aware. Watch social media for upcoming things this week. And we just love you and hope that everyone is doing well right now.
And I just want to say, I've been reading as best I can.
I know,
some of the comments in the chat.
I'm going to have to come back and read them in a little bit.
Thank you guys for your courage to share with us. And I love this format that we're able to hear from you as well. And again, have so much to learn from so many of you guys. So thank you for...
Yes, we hold your stories so close to our hearts.
Yes.
Like every time someone shares personal information about themselves, it's just, I hold it very close to my heart.
Yeah. So we love you all. God bless. Kel, anything else?
No, that's it. Guess we'll just see you next week. Same time, same place.
All right. See you then.